My name is Tom Zilla. I grew up in Chicago in the Wicker Park area, attended parochial grammar school, and went on to Weber High School, which is no longer in business, parochial high school. Went off to Wright Junior College for a year and went into the business world. I was working at a company called J.C. Whitney Warshawski doing their automotive catalog. And while I was there, I got drafted into the military and was inducted on Halloween, trick or treat. No knowledge of Vietnam when I was drafted at the time, which was in 1963. Didn't know anything about the thing. Went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for my basic training. While I was there, President Kennedy was assassinated. The entire military was put on red alert. We were still in boot camp and we were given weapons. Thank God, no ammunition, because some of the people I was in boot camp with, I would think twice about handing them a loaded weapon. Well, anyhow, we watched the funeral on television. Everything was suspended until it was over with. We stepped down from the red alert and finished up boot camp. From there, I was sent to Fort Rucker, Alabama, to go into helicopter maintenance school. And how I ended up there was because I worked for this automotive company. I could identify parts, but I could not put them together. Plus, I wouldn't fly in anything that I had to put together. So I was able to worm my way out of that and get into flight operations. We left in September to fly to Saigon. Arrived in Saigon, and I got the wonderful job of taking all of that documentation of our equipment and personnel records up to our new battalion headquarters in Pleiku in the Central Highlands. Pleiku was in the countryside. I was in Da Nang, up in the second largest city in Vietnam. Okay, Pleiku was in the countryside, was hilly. They primarily worked with the mountain yard people that were there. They're kind of like native, I don't want to say Native Americans. They were native to the area, let's put it this way. Indigenous people to the area. And they had lived in straw huts, elevated off the ground because of the monsoon season and flooding. Walked through the village, I think on a future mission while I was there. You know, the women were bare-breasted, wearing sarong kind of wrap. The men in just very skimpy shorts of some sort, and using bow and arrow for their hunting kind of a deal. So they were, very primitive people. They informed me that a flight was coming in to pick me up, to take me up to Da Nang, where all of my unit was permanently stationed. But they told me that the flight would not stop for me because that the airfield was always subject to mortar attack every time a plane landed there. So what they told me, that the plane would land, taxi in, turn around and start taxiing. They would drop the tailgate down on the C-130, and I would have to chase after the plane, run up the tailgate and into the vehicle or into the aircraft. Okay, so the plane lands, turns around, starts taxiing down there, grab my gear, and I'm chugging after the plane, and all of a sudden I heard the first round go off in back of me. Needless to say, I ran faster than I ever have in my entire life, ran up the ramp through the entire C-130, all the way up to the cockpit, where the pilot turned around and said, "There ain't room for you up here." So I sat down, and this was the start of my adventures in Vietnam on day 3 while I was in country. Flew into Da Nang, which was the second largest city in Vietnam, but it was like a French colonial port or town. Surrounding Da Nang was where the rubber plantations that French rubber company had, where they sent the rubber back to make tires. We had no operations center, and this is my task, was to create an operations center which kept track of the helicopters that we had on hand, the up-and-coming missions where we were to go, and if there was problems in flight, we had to make sure that we were able to track the aircraft, so if anybody went down, we knew what area that they were in. And in addition to this, there was a rotating duty roster where we served as gunners on the helicopter. Usually there were pilot, co-pilot, and the crew chief was a gunner on the left-hand side of the aircraft, and we needed a gunner on the right-hand side of the aircraft, and that turned out to be one of us enlisted personnel on a rotating duty roster to go out on missions. Some of the missions were peaceful and serene, and others we couldn't wait to get the hell out of there because things were hot and heavy, and we were happy to get back home. In fact, one of the first missions I flew at, I had experienced a thing thinking to myself, oh my God, they're shooting at me. And I was flying with our commanding officer who said, Zilla, you better start returning fire or we're not going to be up here much longer. I assumed it was the VC, the Viet Cong, that were shooting at us. But you have to remember, we're in a helicopter and we're probably 1,000 feet off the ground. So we're not really seeing individuals shooting at us. We fired back with tracer rounds, so we knew where our rounds were going into the area. And we would go into a hamlet or an area that we knew that the VC were in, and because we were receiving fire, we were returning fire, not only machine gun fire, but some of the gunships that were with us had rockets and grenade launchers on it to fight back, because we were flying escort for the Marines, their 34 helicopters, where they could carry troops and drop them off. They were either dropping Marines off or they were dropping ARVN troops off into the jungle, and we were flying escort for them to give them cover as they landed, because the 34 helicopters just had door gunners and no weapons, so to speak, to get them safely into the area and out of the area. The Viet Cong were North Vietnam troops that invaded South Vietnam secretly through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through I Corps, and I Corps was where we were stationed. So up into, it's in the northeast or northwest corner of I Corps. And let me try and clarify that. Vietnam was divided into 4 corps, tactical corps, 1 through 4, one being up north by the demilitarized zone, where we were stationed, where Da Nang was, and then they were numbered all the way down to 4, which covered the Delta area in the southern part of South Vietnam. We were approaching the Christmas holidays, and in operations, we were joking that we needed a Christmas tree. And there were pine trees that were growing in Vietnam, not the typical Christmas tree that we have here, but there were pine trees. So we had convinced our commanding officer, Major Crockett, who I'm still friends with today, he's now General Crockett, retired, that we needed to have a mission set up to go out and bring a Christmas tree back. Well, we convinced some of the warrant officers to go along, and of course I was the chosen person to go and cut this tree down. We landed, we flew out, got into the area that the pine trees were at, landed. I jumped out wearing a flak vest and a communications, kind of a walkie-talkie thing clipped to the flak vest, with an axe and a bow saw, and wearing a sidearm. The minute the helicopter lifted off, I started receiving, somebody was shooting at me. Couldn't see where, saw where the rounds were coming from, and I'm flat on the ground. And so I called back to, I think it was Warrant Officer Bozak, who was flying the helicopter, and said that I was receiving fire, and he says, from where? And I kind of directed him to where I was in my position. He was hovering above me and started firing into that area, and I'm wearing a flak vest which comes back and pushes up on your back, so your neck is exposed. And he's firing into this thing, and meanwhile these casings off the machine gun are falling down on top of me, rolling down my back. I am calling Bozak every name in the book while he's doing this, because can't you get further back or move up further, because you're burying me in these casings. Well, I'll make a long story short. We never did get the tree, got back in the helicopter, returned, because we flew escort for the Marines. The Marines decided to send an entire company of people out. They went and cut the tree down, brought it back to us, and so we had a Christmas tree in our operations center for Christmas, thanks to the Marines. We were living in a hotel. I have friends today who think that I was in a different war than they were. We lived in the Da Nang Hotel, downtown Da Nang, that the military had taken over. We had private rooms, private bathrooms, and air conditioning. And thankful for the air conditioning, because we could go to the PX and buy beer and put it in the air conditioning so we could have a drink afterwards when we came back from a mission, have a nice ice-cold beer. But that's where we lived. And as the troops built up over time while we were in country, our private room went to 2 in a room, then it went to 3 in a room, and then it went to 4 in a room. And when I left country, there were 6 in a room. So if you can imagine 6 guys in one room, and then this was like what I guess they call it a Jack and Jill bathroom, with 6 in another room, with 12 of us trying to get dressed, showered, etc., and everything else. It was an exciting mornings sometimes. This may have been the second largest city in Vietnam, but probably 80% of the houses did not have running water. Most of the houses had dirt floors in them. It was only the very elite that could have running water. Electricity was, for the city, was far and few between, the houses that had electricity. Plus, electricity, I think, was only available certain hours of the day, but I don't remember what it was for the city. We at the hotel, we had generators, so we had power all the time. Their life went on in the big city, because it was rather interesting. A lot of the Viet Cong activity was in the countryside, primarily along the Cambodian border, because that's where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was going into South Vietnam. So a lot of our missions were there to keep things under control. We'd be out on a reconnaissance flight or something other like this, and when you started, a fixed-wing aircraft would be on a reconnaissance flight, taking pictures of the area so that intelligence can then make comparisons of what was going on. They would receive ground fire and make note of the coordinates, and then we would send the mission in there just to see what was there and make sure that it was an encampment or a VC or a Viet Cong hamlet that was there. And if it was a full-fledged hamlet, it was then scheduled for a full-run mission to either chase them out or to take them out. In the city itself, the people were on a friendly basis. We were on a friendly basis with all of the civilians there. But we couldn't tell who was a good guy or who was a bad guy. Everybody looked right, the same. Everybody wore the same clothing. And I'm sure that there were VC that we interacted with, but we didn't know that. That was one of the problems that we had as time, or I should say that the military had as time went on, and they started infiltrating into the city. We couldn't tell who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. And this is when, further on, several years upstream, where things got really touch and go in the city proper, in any of the city proper. Prior to my getting drafted, I was a scout leader and a merit badge counselor for first aid, and had Red Cross training. We were in a special forces camp, and I can't even remember the kid's name. He had a sucking chest wound, and I smoked at the time, and part of a sucking chest wound is that you can't inhale to breathe, and he was having difficulty breathing. And I took the cellophane wrapper off of my cigarettes that I had, placed it over the wound, put gauze, and used duct tape to hold it on him. And then we medevaced him back to the hospital in Da Nang to be taken care of. He lived, and I was given a bronze, or awarded a Bronze Star. Your tour duty in Vietnam was only a year. We got there the end of August, so come September, and we were going home. Because we came as a unit, clusters of us were going home together on the same flight. Transferred down to Saigon, flew from Da Nang to Saigon, checked in, loaded on. We were flying home on a Continental Airline flight from Saigon to head back to the States. And it was a civilian flight loaded with a bunch of GIs who were in country, including us guys who flew together, so we were kind of clustered on the plane. And one of the greatest moments was when that aircraft went down the runway and you could hear those wheels hit the fuselage as it was airborne. We all cheered. And the stewardesses aboard the thing popped bottles of champagne for all of us. So we partied for the better part of the flight home, and we landed on a Friday. And they told us that they couldn't muster us out that day, that we would spend the weekend in Oakland. And my buddy and I looked at each other and said, we're not staying on a military base and we're home. And so we went AWOL. And we went to San Francisco and spent the weekend in San Francisco. Mo, his girlfriend, was an airline stewardess, so she flew into San Francisco. We checked into the St. Francis Hotel, and we just had a great time. I had my room, they had their room, and we partied in San Francisco. And I was kind of shocked because this was the hippie colony of the world at the time, and we thought everybody in San Francisco was going crazy. You know, after spending a year out of country and then finding all these crazy attitudes in San Francisco, it was kind of bizarre. You know, full-size nude pictures in the windows, etc., and everything else. We thought America went off the deep end while we were out of country. Went back to Oakland on Monday morning. We took a cabin. We got a little butt chewing because that we went AWOL, but nobody did anything. We were mustered out, and we were taken to the airport and flew back home to Chicago that Monday. And I was happy to be home once again. I was very proud to serve in the military. I was very proud that I was helping my country, because when we were there in country, I think it was a whole different story about Vietnam. I knew nothing about Vietnam when I got into country. I know that my parents, when I said that I was going overseas and going to Vietnam, they were apprehensive. They didn't know what Vietnam was. I didn't know what Vietnam was. But, I thought it was just an overseas duty station. Little did I know that I was going to be involved in a shooting war. And as I said, after the initial firefights, you kind of got used to it. And I think part of it was because we were able to do our mission and then come back to a routine that was normal. And we'd go out. And the best thing I can say is it's probably like a video game. You know, we had a video game, and then we came back home. We did a video game, and we came back home. But it wasn't a video game. It was for real.